So for thousands of years, billions of people have read the exact same sentence right on the very first page of the book of Genesis.
Yeah, the famous "Let there be light."
Right, exactly. God says, let there be light. And supposedly this happens on day one of creation. But, I mean, if you stop treating this text like some untouchable sacred relic that you aren't allowed to question, and you actually look at the mechanics of what is written, you run into this massive, glaring problem.
A huge logical problem, yeah.
Because the sun and the moon and the stars, they were not created until day 4.
Right.
So if we're looking at a chronological history of the universe, like so many people do, what exactly was shining on day 1? And honestly, how on earth could there be a morning and an evening on the first 3 days without a sun to actually rise and set?
It doesn't make any sense mechanically.
It really doesn't. So welcome to the Deep Dive Learner. Today we are taking a scalpel to one of the most famous documents in human history. And we're examining this fascinating textual analysis that basically suggests almost everyone has been reading this book completely backwards.
Completely backwards, yeah.
Right.
It is the ultimate paradox just hiding in plain sight. And I mean, the implications of it are staggering.
They really are.
Because we are looking at a framework today that argues this day 1 versus day 4 contradiction. It's not a mistake. It is not some primitive ignorance of astronomy where they just didn't know how the sky works.
Right, that they just forgot where the sun came from.
Exactly. It is a deliberate, highly sophisticated puzzle. And unraveling it doesn't just solve some niche theological riddle, right? It actually provides a masterclass in how to read ancient texts for their spirit rather than their literal physical letter.
And learner, I promise you, whether you are, a devoted theologian or just a hardcore literature nerd, or even just someone who is insanely curious about how human beings construct and hide meaning, you are going to experience a massive aha moment today.
Oh, absolutely. It shifts everything.
Yeah. It really does. We are going to decode how ancient symbols of light and dark fundamentally shape our whole understanding of truth and reality in human consciousness. But to get to that profound metaphorical meaning of this light, we first have to kind of do the demolition work, right?
We have to tear down the literal interpretation first.
Exactly. We have to prove why the literal reading completely and spectacularly breaks down.
You absolutely have to dismantle that literal reading before the metaphorical one can even take root in your mind.
Right.
The analysis we are exploring today, it meticulously walks through the timeline provided in Genesis to show just how logically and scientifically impossible a literal reading actually is.
Yeah, it's like a trap.
It starts by taking the text at its exact literal word just to watch it collapse under its own weight.
Okay, well, let's walk into that collapse then.
Yeah.
So day 1, we have this mysterious light. And the text says the light is separated from the darkness, calling the light day and the darkness night.
Right.
Then we move forward. Day 3, the earth is supposedly formed and it produces vegetation. So we're talking grass and herbs and fruit-bearing trees.
All on day 3.
All on day 3. But then we hit day 4. And the text explicitly states that this is when the great lights were created to govern the day and the night, meaning the sun and the moon.
Yeah, and this is where the literalist approach requires just an Olympic level of mental gymnastics.
Oh, for sure.
Because think about the history of how people have tried to rationalize this. You have top-tier scholars going all the way back through centuries of debate trying to make the physics work.
Like trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. Some commentators argue that the day 1 light was like a temporary cosmic spark. Others suggest it was a massive localized flash of lightning or some kind of mystical glowing aura that just hung in the sky to act as a placeholder for the sun.
But none of those explanations actually solve the mechanical problem of a day.
No, they don't.
I mean, if there is no sun and no earth rotating on its axis in relation to the gravitational pull of that sun, there is no physical concept of day and night.
Right. You can't have a sunset without a sun.
Exactly. You cannot have a morning. You cannot have an evening. You just have empty space.
Precisely. The rotation of the Earth relative to a stationary light source is the entire definition of a day. And furthermore, I mean, if we're reading this as a literal historical logbook, what happens to the ecosystem created on day 3?
Oh man, the plants.
Yeah, we have grass and fruit trees sprouting out of the dirt, but there is no sun yet. There is no photosynthesis.
So they just die.
In a literal scientific reading, the entire botanical ecosystem of the planet basically freezes or dies of starvation before day 4 even begins.
Okay, but let me push back here for a second, because I know exactly what a lot of modern readers try to do to rescue this timeline.
Let's hear it.
Couldn't the light on day 1 just be a primitive culture's metaphor for the Big Bang? Like the initial massive explosion of cosmic radiation and energy that eventually billions of years later coalesced into stars and planets on day 4. People love to bridge the gap between a religion and science that way.
They do. It is an incredibly common modern reflex. It's often called concordism, where you're trying to forcefully squeeze ancient poetry into the mold of modern astrophysics.
Right.
But the textual analysis we are looking at explicitly rejects that approach. Attempting to fit this into the Big Bang completely misses the point of the text.
Because it's not a science book.
Exactly. This document is not about physics or quantum mechanics or the origins of cosmic microwave background radiation. It is entirely about a concept known in ancient philosophy as the word.
Wait, let's pause on that. Because when I hear the word, I just think of letters on a page or something spoken out loud. But you were talking about something much heavier.
Much heavier, yes.
When you say the word in this ancient context, what did that actually mean to a first-century mind?
That is the crucial pivot here. In the original Greek of the New Testament, which heavily comments on Genesis, the term used is logos.
Logos, yeah.
And to an ancient Greek philosopher like Heraclitus or the Stoics, the logos wasn't just a spoken syllable, it was the animating rational principle of the universe.
Like the fundamental logic of everything.
Exactly. It was the underlying truth, the ultimate logic that brings order out of chaos. If you look at Eastern traditions, the closest equivalent is the Tao, the fundamental way or path of reality.
So it's not a photon. It's not electromagnetic radiation bouncing off a retina.
Not at all. The light on day 1 is not a physical object. It is the manifestation of the logos. The text says God spoke, and that word produced light.
Wow.
So this light represents ultimate unvarnished spiritual truth. And within the specific theological framework of our textual analysis, this truth ultimately manifests as a messenger or a person specifically pointing toward the figure of Jesus, who later in the biblical narrative explicitly identifies himself by saying, "I am the light of the world."
But if this is all a grand metaphor for truth and order, why use a timeline that deliberately trips up the reader?
What do you mean?
Well, why put the sun on day 4? I mean, if I'm writing a profound philosophical treatise, I don't want my reader getting distracted by a glaring chronological error on page 1.
Unless distraction is the very tool you are using to filter your audience.
Oh, man.
Yeah, this changes everything about how we view the author's intent. The day 1 versus day 4 contradiction isn't a careless editing mistake made by a primitive tribe who didn't know where the sun came from.
Right, they obviously knew plants needed the sun.
Exactly. The author, traditionally Moses, knew exactly what a sun was. This contradiction is posited as a deliberate, sophisticated puzzle. It is a locked door.
Like a built-in tripwire for literalists.
Yes, perfectly said.
If you're reading it arrogantly, treating it like a dry science textbook, you trip over day 4 and fall flat on your face, you're supposed to hit that paradox and realize, oh, I'm using the wrong map for this territory. I need to look deeper.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The literal text is a decoy.
A decoy, wow.
It forces the reader to stop acknowledge the absurdity of the literal meaning and search for the hidden spiritual architecture. But acknowledging this leads us to an even more fundamental shift.
Okay, but that?
Well, if the creation story isn't a literal chronological history of the physical universe being forged in 144 hours, then when is this all happening?
Yeah, that completely destabilizes the timeline. Because the very first words of the book are in the beginning.
Right.
If it's not a history book of the deep past, what exactly is the beginning?
To answer that, we have to dive into a fascinating linguistic distinction uncovered in the translation of these ancient concepts.
Let's do it.
The analysis highlights a profound difference between two concepts of the beginning found across different translations, specifically focusing on the philosophical weight carried in languages like Chinese, which capture the nuance perfectly. The distinction is between Tai Chu and Chi Chu.
Okay, unpack those two for me because I don't speak Chinese.
Sure, so Tai Chu represents the absolute ultimate beginning. It is the eternal state, the exact moment when the word, the logos, or the ultimate truth is fully established and present in reality.
Okay, so it's like the arrival of the thing itself.
Yes, it is the culmination of purpose. On the other hand, Kichu merely represents the chronological starting point of a narrative or a prophecy. It's just the moment someone started talking.
So if I'm understanding this, Taichu is the arrival of the actual finalized reality, and Kichu is just the initial prediction that the reality is coming.
Exactly. And to anchor this, the analysis cross-references another massive ancient text, the book of Isaiah, chapter 46, verse 10. In it, the divine voice states that it is declaring the end from the beginning.
Declaring the end from the beginning. That flips the entire concept of time on its head.
It does. It means that Genesis 1 is not a historical logbook looking backward at the formation of the cosmos. It is a prophecy looking forward. Yes. When the text describes the creation of light and the separation of light and dark, it isn't logging an event from billions of years ago. It is declaring an end state of spiritual reality right there at the starting line.
It's like compiling code.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
And the code exists entirely in the programmer's mind, and it's written down on the screen before the software ever actually runs. Or to use a more physical analogy, it's like reading the architectural blueprint of a skyscraper and confusing it for the history of how the building was already built.
Yes, precisely.
Like if I look at a blueprint, I see the finished elevators, the roof, the lobby. But if I stand on an empty dirt lot in the middle of a city and say, look, the skyscraper's already here because this piece of paper says so, I'm completely delusional. The blueprint is a prophecy of a future construction project.
The blueprint analogy is perfect. Genesis 1 is outlining a spiritual construction project, not a physical one. When the text says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," it is laying out the architectural plans for humanity's future spiritual evolution. The light isn't a physical ball of plasma warming an empty rock in space. It is the spiritual illumination that finally arrives when the prophecy is fulfilled.
And according to this textual analysis, when does that fulfillment actually take place? Like, when does the skyscraper get built?
The analysis points to a very specific historical anchor. It argues that this fulfillment began roughly 2,000 years ago, around the 1st century AD, with the arrival of the figure of Jesus who embodies this logos or light.
Okay, so that's the anchor point.
Yeah, that moment in history is when the true spiritual taichu, the absolute beginning of this illuminating truth, was finally established on Earth. That event is what fulfilled the day one prophecy of separating humanity into spiritual day and night.
But hold on, I have to stop you there. This brings up a massive cultural elephant in the room.
The age of the Earth.
Yes. What about the whole debate regarding the age of the Earth? You have modern science definitively proving the physical cosmos is roughly 13.8 billion years old, but you have vast swaths of religious literalists using, Bishop Ussher's 17th century calculations claiming the Earth is strictly 6,000 years old.
Right.
How does this metaphorical framework handle that massive hostile gap?
It handles it by completely sidestepping the conflict, because it changes the definition of what is actually being measured.
Okay.
The analysis we are examining freely acknowledges that the physical universe is unfathomably old, billions of years beyond easy human comprehension. It does not deny physical science, astrophysics, or geology.
Okay, so if it acknowledges deep time, where on Earth does the 6,000-year number come from, and why do people defend it so fiercely?
The 6,000-year figure comes from adding up the specific genealogies listed in the text from Adam to Abraham, Abraham to King David, David to Jesus, and so on.
The begats.
Exactly. But the massive paradigm shift here is realizing what that genealogy actually represents. It is strictly the history of a specific spiritual lineage.
A spiritual niece.
Yes. It is the 6,000-year history of the transmission of this word, this blueprint.
Oh, wow. So it's not the biological history of the human species.
Exactly. Don't confuse the history of the physical dirt with the history of the spiritual blueprint. Adam isn't necessarily the very first biological Homo sapiens to ever evolve and walk across a billion-year-old Earth.
He's just the starting point of the project.
Right. Adam marks the starting point, the chi-chu of the specific 6,000-year spiritual narrative. He is the beginning of the blueprint's transmission.
That completely diffuses the war between science and religion on this issue.
It really does.
But it raises a huge psychological question for me. If Genesis is this profound, complex spiritual blueprint, and the timeline isn't primitive physics but advanced prophecy, why do so many people continue to misread it as literal history?
That is the big question.
And I'm not just talking about casual readership.
Yeah.
I'm talking about dedicated theologians, experts who spend their entire lives studying ancient Hebrew. Why is it so incredibly easy for human beings to get stuck staring at the dirt and completely miss the blueprint?
Because of a very specific, deeply ingrained psychological and spiritual barrier. And the analysis identifies this barrier using a term from the texts themselves. They call it the veil.
The veil. Let's dig into this because this sounds like the underlying mechanism of cognitive dissonance. How does this veil actually operate?
To understand the mechanics of it, we look at an intense passage from the New Testament, specifically 2 Corinthians chapter 3.
Okay.
The text draws a ruthless, uncompromising line between what it calls the letter, meaning the literal, physical, surface-level reading of a text, and the spirit, which is the hidden, metaphorical, architectural meaning. And the phrasing is striking. It says, the literal text kills, but the spirit gives life.
The letter kills. That is incredibly aggressive.
It is absolute. The argument is that if you read the text, literally, if you look at the letter of Genesis 1 and firmly believe it is a story about a physical sun, physical grass, and a physical talking snake, that text is a dead end.
It just stops there.
Right. It offers zero spiritual life. It actually kills your ability to understand the deeper reality because you stop looking. Your curiosity basically dies.
So the veil is essentially a state of blindness.
Yes. When people read the Old Testament, literally, they essentially have a heavy veil over their minds. They're looking directly at the words. Their retinas are processing the ink on the page. But they're completely blind to the actual meaning.
A blueprint is rolled out right in front of them.
Exactly, but its true face is covered by this psychological veil.
Here's where I really struggle, though. Is this veil intentional? Like, is it a feature of the text or a bug in human psychology?
It's a feature.
I'm thinking of it like a heavily encrypted computer file, right? You can download the file, you can open the raw data in a text editor, and it just looks like a garbled, chaotic mess of random characters.
Yes, perfectly said.
You technically possess the entire document, but you can't read a single word of it until you input the correct password to decrypt it. Is the literal text intentionally designed to veil the truth?
The analysis absolutely confirms this. The veil is a necessary, deliberate encryption. The literal stories, the historical logs, the parables, the physical law, they are the encryption algorithm.
Wow.
And this veil is only removed when a person undergoes a very specific internal shift in perspective. The text describes this decryption key as turning to the Lord, which signifies aligning oneself with the true spiritual meaning.
But what does that actually mean mechanically? How do you get the password? Is it just studying harder or learning more Greek?
No, and that is exactly where intellectualism fails. You cannot brute force this encryption with a linguistic dictionary.
So what brings it?
The analysis uses a powerful cultural metaphor to explain the mechanism, the Middle Eastern wedding veil. In ancient traditions, a bride is heavily veiled during the ceremony. The groom only lifts the veil when the time is right, and crucially, he only lifts it because he recognizes the bride as his own.
Oh, I see.
The unveiling requires an intimate relational connection.
So it's not just a matter of processing power or IQ.
Precisely. If the reader's heart and motives do not align with the truth, if they are approaching the text with pure arrogance, or if they just want to dissect it like a lifeless frog on a laboratory table to prove how smart they are, the text remains firmly veiled to them.
Just stays locked.
A hostile reader can memorize the text. They can write a brilliant doctoral dissertation on the syntax of ancient Hebrew. But the bride will never lift the veil for them. They will never see the face of the text.
That is wild. It implies the text is almost interactive.
It is living.
Yeah, it's a living document that responds to the psychological and moral state of the reader's mind.
Yeah.
And the analysis uses the historical figure of Moses to illustrate this dynamic right.
It does, and it grounds this abstract concept in a vivid historical narrative. The analysis points to the story in the book of Exodus, where Moses comes down from Mount Sinai after receiving the law and communing with the divine. The text says his face was literally glowing, shining with such intense, blinding light that it terrified the ancient Israelites. They couldn't even look at him. So Moses was forced to wear a physical veil over his face just to have a conversation with them.
Like wearing eclipse glasses just to talk to your leader.
Yeah.
But what does that historical event actually represent?
It is presented as a physical enactment of a deeper psychological and spiritual reality. The light of the ultimate unvarnished truth is simply too intense, too paradigm-shattering for people who are still comfortable living in spiritual darkness.
Because it would just overload them.
Exactly. If you give them the pure, decoded truth, straight up, it terrifies them. It causes massive cognitive dissonance. Therefore, out of necessity, the truth must be hidden. It must be veiled in metaphors, engaging parables, and literal histories so people can handle being near it without being blinded.
That perfectly circles back to the day one paradox.
Yes, it does.
The literal story of God creating the sun and the trees and the dirt in 6 days, that whole narrative is the veil. It's the comforting physical parable covering the blinding light of the actual blueprint for human consciousness.
You've connected the dots perfectly. The literal story is the fabric woven over the face of the shining truth.
Okay, so let's push this forward. Let's say someone actually does turn to the truth. Their motives align. The encryption is broken, and the veil is finally lifted.
Right.
What does this light actually do once it is exposed to the world?
Yeah.
Because according to our source material, light doesn't just sit there acting like a gentle lamp making things look pretty. It doesn't merely illuminate. It actively divides.
This brings us to a much sharper, deeply confronting aspect of this textual theology. Light is not passive. When light arrives, it forces a separation.
So the analysis references a very famous passage from the Gospel of John, chapter 3. It says something to the effect of, light came into the world, but people loved the darkness instead of the light because their deeds were evil.
Yes. Now connects that back to the grand blueprint of Genesis 1, where God's first action after calling forth the light is to actively separate the day from the night.
Oh, wow.
The analysis argues that this is exactly what the spiritual light does to humanity. When the light, which is the ultimate truth brought by the Logos, or Jesus, arrives in reality, it acts as a great separator.
I see it like an axe or a wedge being driven into a piece of wood. It forces everything to one side or the other.
That's exactly it. The arrival of this spiritual light forces humanity to make an inescapable choice. It separates the population into two distinct categories, what the text calls children of light. Those who are willing to accept the truth, endure the paradigm shift, and step into the illumination, and children of darkness. Those who reject the truth prefer the comfort of the veil and actively choose to stay in the shadows.
It completely eliminates the murky middle ground. But this leads to a fascinating historical claim. The analysis dives deeply into this concept of the night. It claims that when the original bearer of this light, Jesus, left the earth, a long, profound spiritual night fell over the entire world.
Yes. The analysis asserts that for the last 2,000 years, humanity has been enduring what can only be described as a soul's night.
Now, hold on. I have to challenge this premise.
Go for it.
If we've been in a spiritual night for 2,000 years, how does this framework account for the massive leaps in human progress? I mean, what about the Renaissance, the Enlightenment,
Right.
the invention of the printing press, the decoding of the human genome, the eradication of diseases? Are we really supposed to believe that the last 2 millennia have just been a dark age?
That is exactly the distinction the text is forcing us to make. Technological light, intellectual light, and scientific progress are not the same thing as spiritual light.
Okay, explain that.
You can have a society that can split the atom, fly to the moon, and cure polio, but is still fundamentally operating in spiritual darkness, driven by ego, violence, greed, and a complete misunderstanding of ultimate truth.
So the tool got sharper, but the person holding it is still blind.
Exactly. The analysis is arguing that the world has been spiritually asleep, building incredible machines in the dark, waiting for the true dawn to return.
That is a terrifying and kind of humbling perspective.
Yeah.
So if we are asleep in the dark, how does this dawn finally happen?
The analysis discusses the prophecy of this return, citing the Gospel of Matthew chapter 24. It describes the return of the spiritual light in a very peculiar, highly specific way. It says the light will come like a thief in the night.
A thief in the night. It's a famous idiom, but in this specific mechanical context, why use a thief? I mean, why not a conquering general or a massive sunrise that everyone sees at once?
Think about the literal conditions necessary for a thief to be successful.
It has to be dark.
Right. It must be dark, and the occupants of the house must be asleep. The metaphor is used deliberately because the world is deep in this 2,000-year spiritual slumber. If you aren't spiritually awake, if your eyes haven't adjusted to the dark to look for the subtle, quiet signs of the dawn, the truth will be reestablished right under your nose, and you'll sleep right through it.
You'll wake up the next morning stretch and realize the treasure has been taken. Or, in this context, the ultimate truth has arrived, walked right past your bed, and you didn't even notice because you were too comfortable dreaming in the dark.
Precisely. You miss the event entirely. But the text doesn't end in darkness.
No.
The analysis points to the very end of the biblical canon Revelation chapter 22, which promises a future state where there is no more night.
Right. I've heard that.
Again, the literalist assumes this means a physical planet with multiple suns where you can never get a tan. But the metaphorical analysis interprets this as an eternal state where spiritual truth is finally permanently revealed. A state where the truth is no longer obscured by metaphors, no longer hidden in parables, and no longer veiled.
The long, exhausting night of human ignorance finally ends.
Exactly.
Okay, this is a massive, sweeping historical narrative, but it leaves me with a really practical, mechanical question.
What is it?
If the world has been deeply asleep in the dark for 2,000 years, how exactly does the light finally return? It doesn't just magically flip on like a cosmic light switch, right?
It's a process.
And this textual analysis reveals frankly bizarre, incredibly vivid process for how this truth is transmitted back into human consciousness.
It does. It transitions from the abstract philosophical concept of light into a very visceral, physical, almost biological metaphor.
So, learner, brace yourself for this one, because this is one of the wildest, most surreal images in the entire biblical text. It is found in the book of Revelation, chapters 5 and 10.
Yes.
The text describes a scroll. The scroll is sealed with 7 seals, which means it is completely locked down, perfectly encrypted. No one in heaven, on earth, or under the earth can open it. The narrator is actually weeping because the truth is permanently locked away.
Right.
Finally, a specific figure is found worthy to open the seals. He unrolls the scroll, gives it to an angel, and the angel brings this unsealed scroll to a human being with a very specific, bizarre instruction.
Yeah.
Eat it.
Eat the scroll. It is a shocking, abrasive image. But the analysis meticulously explains what eating the book means within this symbolic architecture.
Okay, so what does it mean?
The scroll represents the ultimate spiritual truth, the unsealed mysteries of the text, the blueprint finally decrypted and laid bare. And eating it is a profound psychological metaphor for fully internalizing this truth.
Right, because it's not enough to just read it. You aren't just memorizing bullet points for a test.
Exactly. Think about the mechanics of eating. When you consume something, it is digested. It is broken down by your stomach acid and absorbed directly into your bloodstream. It literally becomes the cells of your body.
It's integrated into you.
Yes, the text is arguing that the ultimate truth cannot just be a detached intellectual exercise. It must become one with the person who receives it. You don't just hold the truth, you become it.
But the text adds a brutal caveat to this experience, which the analysis unpacks beautifully. The text explicitly says that when the person eats the scroll, it is incredibly sweet in their mouth, tasting like honey. But as soon as they swallow it and it hits their stomach, it turns their stomach sour. It becomes profoundly bitter.
This is perhaps the most acute psychological insight in the entire analysis. Yes, because receiving the ultimate truth, having that massive paradigm shift where all the mysteries of the universe suddenly align, the encryption is broken, and you finally see the blueprint, that is a joyful, profoundly sweet experience initially. It is sweet as honey to the intellect.
It's like taking the red pill in the Matrix.
Oh, that is a perfect modern equivalent.
Right, because it's incredibly sweet to finally know the truth, to have the curtain pulled back. That moment of clarity is pure dopamine. But then the realization of how it upends your entire reality sets in.
The bitterness.
Exactly. You realize you are no longer compatible with the rest of society. You realize how impossibly hard it is going to be to explain this new reality to anyone else, especially a world that is heavily invested in staying asleep in the dark. That alienation, that burden, that is the bitter part.
The analysis defines this bitterness as the agonizing burden of the calling. The person who eats the scroll doesn't just get to sit cross-legged on a mountain peak and enjoy their private enlightenment.
You don't get to just chill.
No, they are forcefully repurposed. They become a vessel. They now contain the spiritual food within their own body, and they are tasked with distributing this truth to a hostile, sleeping, deeply defensive world at the exact proper time, what the text calls delivering the food in due season.
It's one thing to know the truth for yourself. It's entirely another nightmare to be responsible for feeding it to people who will actively hate you for trying to wake them up.
And that painful transition from being a joyful receiver of truth to a burdened vessel of truth brings us to the ultimate grand finale of this textual analysis.
Let's bring it home.
What actually happens to a normal, fragile, flawed human being when they internalize this immense, universe-altering light?
Right, because a human being is just human. We get tired, we get angry, we have anxiety, we make mistakes. How can a fragile biological organism hold the absolute, unvarnished truth of the Logos?
The analysis brings in 2 final pieces of text to resolve this tension. First, it references Isaiah 41, which prophesies a figure rising from the east to bring truth and clarity to the world. And second, it uses an incredible metaphor from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, which talks about having a divine blinding treasure hidden inside earthen vessels or cheap clay jars.
And this is where the analysis introduces a cultural concept that completely blew my mind. It's the Eastern concept of Kai Guang.
Yes. Could you unpack the mechanics of that concept for our listeners?
Absolutely. So Kai Guang translates roughly to opening the light or consecration.
Okay.
In various Eastern traditions, if you carve a statue of a deity out of a block of wood or a piece of stone, it's just a piece of wood. It is an inanimate object with zero inherent power. You could use it as a doorstop.
Right, it's mundane.
But a religious figure will perform a highly specific ritual of Kai Guang on the statue. They consecrate it. And the underlying belief is that through this ritual, the spirit, the essence, or the power of the deity is invited into the physical object.
So it changes internally.
Exactly. The physical object doesn't change one bit on the outside. It's still just painted wood, but inside, its light is opened. It ceases to be mundane. It becomes profoundly sacred.
It is a masterful cross-cultural synthesis to apply this concept back to the biblical text.
It really is.
The analysis argues that human beings are those unconsecrated items. We are, to use the biblical language, just cheap clay pots. We are 50-cent earthen vessels you would buy at a market and throw away when they chip. We are ordinary, mundane dirt.
We are quite literally just the clay that God formed on day 6 of the story.
Exactly. We are just dirt. But when God shines the ultimate light, the truth, the unsealed word, the digested scroll into the mind and heart of a person who has fully internalized it, that person undergoes a spiritual kaiguang. Their light is opened. They are consecrated.
It completely reframes human value. It's not about the clay pot being flawless. It's not about the pot magically transforming into solid, indestructible gold.
The pot remains cheap.
Exactly. It remains fragile. It still has cracks. The value is entirely 100% in the blindingly bright treasure hidden inside it.
This realization answers the very paradox we started this entire deep dive with. This is exactly why the light on day 1 is not a literal physical sun in the sky. The ultimate light of creation is an internal illumination.
Right.
The analysis notes a beautiful historical and artistic detail here in ancient religious art across countless different cultures. Saints, prophets, and holy figures were almost always painted with glowing halos or light circles radiating from their heads.
Right. You see it in Byzantine mosaics, medieval European art, Eastern Buddhist paintings. It's everywhere.
The analysis points out that while these historical figures may not have literally physically glowed like walking light bulbs, the ancient artists perfectly captured the underlying spiritual reality.
Because they had undergone kaiguang.
Exactly. Their minds, their words, their understanding had undergone kaiguang. They were illuminated from the inside out. They carried the day 1 light within their own consciousness, which gave them the divine power to separate truth from lies, light from dark, day from night, just as the Creator did at the very beginning of the text.
Wow. Okay, let's take a deep breath and look back at the incredible journey we just went on.
It's been quite a ride.
Really has. We started with what looked like a sloppy, primitive, embarrassing paradox about the sun not existing on day 1 of creation. But by utterly refusing to settle for the lazy, literal letter of the text, this analysis took us through ancient prophecies of the future complex linguistic puzzles between 2 types of beginnings: the psychological encryption of a bridal veil, a 2,000-year spiritual dark age, the sweet and bitter neurochemistry of digesting a sealed scroll, and finally arrived at a profound, sweeping realization about the ultimate potential of human consciousness.
It fundamentally re-engineers how we interact with ancient literature. The text isn't a broken, factually incorrect history book full of scientific errors. It is a locked, perfectly encrypted treasure chest holding a blueprint for how humanity transitions from darkness to light.
So, learner, we always ask, why does this matter to you? You might never open the book of Genesis again in your life. Tomorrow you might be analyzing a complex scientific paper, or parsing the spin of the evening news, or having a difficult, layered conversation with your partner.
The relevance of this framework is universal. In every aspect of life, we are constantly faced with a choice in how we interpret the world around us.
Absolutely.
Do we aggressively read the literal letter of a situation, the surface-level actions, the obvious spoken words, and stubbornly stay in the dark about what is actually happening? Or do we search for the spirit? Do we look for the encrypted meaning? Do we have the humility to lift the veil? And do we endure the bitter process of turning on the light of deeper understanding?
We get to choose whether we stay as empty 50-cent clay pots, or if we do the hard work of letting the light in. Which leaves you with one final thought to mull over today, learner.
What's that?
Well, if a cheap, incredibly fragile clay pot can become absolutely priceless just by holding the unvarnished light of truth, what kind of light are you actively choosing to fill your own vessel with every single day? Are you just mindlessly swallowing the fast food of literal surface-level information that the world feeds you through a screen? Or are you hunting for the bittersweet scroll of actual deep understanding? Keep your eyes open, learner. The literal sun might be shining up in the sky, but that doesn't mean you aren't walking around in the dark.